Today I noticed some of my hair was gray. I'm not really sure when it happened. I guess you could say my hair has always been a weird topic. It brings back memories of the way things used to be, how I used to be. Events in my life have taught me one thing: trust no one. Everyone has an agenda. In 2008, I had alopecia. At the time, I never thought I was a vain person. My appearance was never at the top of my list. I would kind of use my appearance as a gauge of character. Meaning, if my simple appearance affects someone's feelings about me, good riddance. Chances are they're a person you wouldn't want in your life anyway. Living this way had always worked for me. Once a 5-year relationship ended, I knew what love truly was. I also knew how it felt when it was thrown away. After a lot of time, booze, and bong hits, I stopped living like a couch potato and started to get out more. I wanted the exciting bachelor life. With that being said, that kind of life got old real quick. I wasn't a smooth talker with the ladies, and I've been out of the game so long, I was completely lost. In hindsight, I'm sure I had a huge chip on my shoulder. After numerous blind dates and trendy matchmaker websites, I just stopped trying. My life became work, home, sleep, repeat. Sounds depressing, I know. But isn't that everyone's life? So I moved on and I just existed. I was getting ready for work and gave myself a quick buzz cut. When I got out of the shower, I looked in the mirror and I noticed I had a bald spot on the side of my head, a little bigger than the size of a quarter. Feeling confused, I inspected my hair buzzer and thought to myself, there's no way I could have done this with my buzzer setting. It's impossible. The skin around the bald spot was not irritated in any way, but it had to get checked out. I hopped on my Softail and headed to the local walk-in clinic. While on my way, I was stopped at a red light. A woman walked along the crosswalk in front of me. I couldn't stop staring at her. She was beautiful. She had long, thick, wavy hair that was almost black. She caught me staring and smiled at me. Before I knew it, the car behind me was blaring their horn because the light turned green, so I sped off. While sitting in the doctor's waiting room for what seemed like 10 hours, I couldn't stop thinking of that woman I saw while riding to the clinic. I see beautiful women all the time around town, but none of them ever had this effect on me. I just kept seeing her face in my mind and my infatuation just grew. Suddenly a voice called out, "The doctor's ready to see you now." I jumped and saw a smiling nurse waving for me to follow her into the examination room. As soon as the doctor saw me, without skipping a beat, he said, "You have alopecia." While leaning in to get a closer look at the bald spot, I remember feeling annoyed at how casual he said it, as if I won a prize from some cheesy game show host. So I replied with an annoyed tone, "And what the hell is that?" Realizing I didn't find him amusing, the doctor cleared his throat and professionally stated, "Alopecia is a common autoimmune disorder that results in unpredictable hair loss. One's immune system mistakenly attacks hair follicles, and it can affect anyone regardless of age and gender." Is there any medication I could take? Corticosteroids can be injected to the areas. It doesn't have a high success rate. There's also medication in pill form, which all have their own side effects, with a limited success rate. After an awkward silence, I kinda just said, "Well, that fucking sucks." The doctor looked back at me and said, "You should see a dermatologist." With some luck, I found one in the next town over. When I walked in, the dusty old waiting room was empty. There wasn't even a receptionist. There were worn magazines that looked at least 2 decades old. I figured I must have had the wrong building. As I turned to leave, the office door opened up and I was greeted by a very large man with a very pale complexion.
"Hello, how can I help you?"
Without saying anything, I pulled off my bandana and showed him my head.
"Alopecia, I see. Follow me into my office."
As I sat down in his office, the doctor opened his desk drawer, pulled out a couple of photos and slid them across the desk towards me. They were pictures of the doctor with the same patchy bald spots that I had.
"I had alopecia myself. No doctor seemed to be of any help. None of their treatments worked. After much hard work and dedication, I was able to form my own treatment, one that actually works. It's called Zyplomine. Because there's no large corporation backing it, they act as if it doesn't even exist.
I looked at the doctor's head and noticed his thick graying hair. He had no bald spots at all. He didn't even appear to have any sort of receding hairline. He reached over and unlocked the cabinet, pulling out a bottle of pills and handed them to me.
With these pills, you can expect hair regrowth in about 2 to 3 days.
Does it have side effects?
Some patients reported having slight headaches for the first couple of weeks.
Am I going to start growing hair everywhere? Like Chewbacca? I asked with a grin.
No. You will have natural hair regrowth. No flowing locks like a Wookiee.
The doctor chuckled and continued.
The first bottle's on me. Refills cost $85.
I thought to myself, goodbye, Mr. Patchy. I opened the bottle and asked the doctor for a glass of water to take my first dose. While riding home from the doctor, I stopped at the store to grab a case of beer and I saw her. The woman from this morning at the crosswalk. She was slowly walking down an aisle looking at all the red wine. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She was wearing this dark red dress with a long black shawl as if she was from the 1800s. She seemed to be my age, late 20s, early 30s. She was absolutely beautiful, clearly out of my league. As I brushed past her because clearly I was pussing out, she glanced at me and we made eye contact. She gave me a smirk as if she knew I was checking her out and said,
"I like your bike."
So I smiled back and said, "I like your dress." As those words came out of my mouth, I glanced down and noticed the bottom of her dress had mud all over it. While glancing out the window at my bike, she continued,
"Harleys must be freeing, like flying."
Taken back from her enthusiasm, I ignored her intrigue about my bike and asked, "Did you walk here?"
We always walk when coming into town.
We?
My family.
You don't have a car? With a smile on her face, she said,
It's one of our ways of staying close to the earth, to be grounded, connected.
Then she placed her hand on my head and said,
You're kinda cute. I love the feeling of a fuzzy head.
As she ran her fingers through my buzzed haircut, my stomach dropped. I remember I never put my bandana back on. Quickly I pulled back, embarrassed, as she smiled.
Alopecia's nothing to be ashamed of. My father had it too. One day his hair started growing back and it's never been a problem again.
Then I loosened up and playfully asked, Am I the only one that's never heard of alopecia until today? She smiled and then shrugged her shoulders while holding back some laughter.
You seem different than most of the people in this town.
Me? You're the one that looks as if she came from the 1800s.
Are you making fun of my dress?
Before I could answer, she said,
I like to make my own clothes.
No, your dress is awesome. I'm only teasing you. But that mud is going to ruin it. Before her rebuttal, I quickly asked, What did you mean, staying close to the earth? Is it a religion thing? I guess maybe I should have read the situation and realized she was getting uncomfortable, because then she tensed up at my curiosity.
I'm sorry, I really have to go. They're waiting for me. It was nice meeting you.
It was nice meeting you. Oh, hey, what's your name? I'm Matt.
Robin.
Can I call you sometime? She looked at the phone and then back up at my eyes as she took it. She dialed her number and then called herself. Motor Breath from Metallica started blaring from her phone. I simply froze and my eyes got wide as I blurted out, You just got even more awesome. Even though I wanted to say marry me because I've been a Metallica freak since I could speak. She started to giggle and handed my phone back to me. As I opened my jacket to show her the Metallica Kill 'Em All t-shirt I was wearing, she stopped and simply said with a smile,
Some say it's been written.
As she turned to walk out of the store, I remember thinking, she's kind of weird, but I like it. When I got back home, I was walking across my front lawn towards the door, and all of a sudden my ears started to ring. At first it was subtle, but then it started to get worse and my head started to pound. I collapsed to my knees and covered my ears as the ground started to shake. The ringing in my ears got so intense I cried out in pain.
Oh my God! Ah!
Quickly the ringing started to fade as the ground started to settle. I saw my neighbor tinkering with his car like nothing happened. This couldn't have been an earthquake. This must be screwing with my vertigo or something. It has to be a side effect, I told myself. That night I was watching some TV while lying in bed. My ears stopped ringing, but I still felt on edge after I had my own personal earthquake. I started feeling itchy and I sat up in bed and looked back at the pillow to see more of my hair has fallen out. I reached up and ran my hand through my hair to find even more hair in my hand. It was falling out anytime anything touched it. In the bathroom mirror, I could see all the new bald spots that were now all over my head. With panic, all I could think, this cannot be fucking happening to me. What the fuck? I grabbed the shaving cream and started applying it to my head as I muttered, might as well speed this up, quit whining, and own it. I knew I was lying to myself. I knew this was going to bother me a lot. After finishing and cleaning everything up, I looked at myself in the mirror with disgust, turned away, and went to bed. I didn't really sleep too well that night. My headaches and the tremors kept coming back. It felt as if the ground would open up and swallow me whole. I would scream out in pain as they got so intense I thought my head was going to pop. Then suddenly they would stop and the tremors would fade away. The next day I slept into the afternoon, still lying in bed not wanting to face the day. I looked over and grabbed my cell phone. It opened right up to Robin's contact information. Just seeing her name brought a smile to my face. Without even thinking, I touched the screen to dial her number. I remember my heart pounding. I didn't even know what I was going to say. It kept ringing until an automated message came on.
No one is available to take your call. Please leave a message after the tone.
I paused for a second and then disconnected the call. I didn't want to sound like an ass and leave some stuttering message, so I started to write her a text, when suddenly my phone started to vibrate and the screen flashed Robin Mobile. My heart stopped as I almost dropped the phone, but managed to answer it. Hello? I stuttered while thinking, fuck, why am I stuttering? I've never stuttered before. A soft but excited voice answered.
Hi, Matt. It's Robin. Sorry I missed your call. I'm in town at the bookstore. You want to come meet me here?
I'd love to. I'll see you in about 20 minutes.
Okay, see you then.
With excitement, I jumped up to go get ready and got in the shower to reshave my head and get rid of that stubble that grew overnight. I ended up nicking the top of my head and started to see droplets of blood hitting the shower stall's floor. I got out of the shower and looked in the mirror at the fresh scrape on my scalp. After I got it to stop bleeding, my face cringed at the sight of this cut, thinking how angry and ugly it looked. What am I going to do now? I thought to myself as I looked around in the bathroom for something to use. I opened the cabinet under the sink to reveal a cluttered mess of mostly empty cleaning products. But then, I spotted an old dusty makeup bag at the back of the cabinet. It must have been Amy's, my ex. I opened up the bag and saw her cover up and started applying it to my head. I have reached a whole new low, I thought to myself. As I blotted the skin-colored goop, it started to sting as I covered the cut, but soon the scrape started to dissipate. It wasn't completely invisible, but it was good enough. I almost forgot, but then remembered to take my new medication before leaving. Soon enough, I found myself at the bookstore. I walked back to the reading section where all the couches and recliners were to encourage customers to stay and buy expensive coffee and cappuccinos. The store didn't really seem to have too many customers today. I saw Robin curled up at one end of the couch all by herself, reading a book. I plopped down next to her on the couch as she looked up at me and smiled.
You don't need this bandana.
As she pulled the bandana off my head, she immediately gasped and started to laugh hysterically.
What did you do to yourself? Is that makeup?
Her laugh didn't insult me. It relaxed me. I started to laugh, realizing how goofy it must have looked with all that goop on my head. When I looked at my reflection in the glass of a nearby table, I saw, in this light, the color of the goop did not match my head at all. My head looked like a cupcake with icing. She then reached over and grabbed a napkin and dipped it in a glass of water on the table. Very gently, she started wiping the makeup away.
This cut will heal quickly and your hair will come back. And then I could play with that soft fuzz in your head again.
She wrapped an arm around me and pulled me close, while gently resting her forehead against mine. It was weird how comfortable she felt with me, considering we didn't really know each other. I was surprised I didn't tense up. I strangely felt at ease too. After a warm, comfortable silence, she glanced at the clock and her smile started to fade into a worried expression. Then she whispered,
I have to go. We'll meet again.
And that's how our relationship began. I'd see her once or twice a week at the bookstore, and we would just talk. She would tell me about all the places she wanted to see around the world, her love of making her own clothes. But after a month or so, I asked about her family. and that's when she unloaded the 10-ton weight of misery that was her life. I came to learn that her father was a very overbearing man. Everything was pretty average and normal until one day her father went out hunting. He didn't return until 2 weeks later, and when he came back, he was different. All he would say is that he was given an opportunity. Ever since then, he's had this distance to him. He has this unhealthy obsession for this project. Soon after that, her mother became very sick, and after a couple of months, she died in her sleep. Robin told me her father showed no emotion at all. He wouldn't talk to her after that. All he would say is that they now have a purpose and that they shouldn't associate with outsiders anymore. She was absolutely heartbroken. He told her that her new family would be here soon. As the weeks passed, more and more people showed up. None of them would speak to her. No matter how many times she tried to start a conversation, they would just give her a blank stare. Just when I thought it couldn't get any stranger, she told me more about her new family members and that she recognized some of them. They were residents from our town. She said,
They were strange. I noticed one of them was the store clerk from the 7-Eleven. He had no expression. And as the days passed, they all started to smell like rotten eggs. They all looked like their health was rapidly declining. Then I noticed the store clerk was gone, and everyone was new. These people would only be around for a few years to then be replaced by others. If I went into town, I'd always spot them staring at me. They would follow me everywhere.
Completely creeped out but totally glued to every word, I hesitated to interrupt her, but I asked, "How many people are in this family?" She answered cautiously,
About 30 now, but in the past there was like 50 or so.
Feeling heartbroken, I stopped her and said, "Let's go. Come to my house. You need to get out of there. Your father's into some weird shit." She looked at me as a tear ran down her face and said,
He knows who you are and where you live. This morning he asked me to invite you to dinner. I was so confused, and then I told him that I didn't even know who you were, but he replied to me saying that Matt is always welcome here.
"What the fuck?" I said under my breath and continued, "Well, I guess I'm coming to dinner, and tonight we leave, regardless of your father's desires." Robin quickly wrapped her arms around me and squeezed really tight.
Thank you so much.
I wasn't happy watching her make her way up the trail. All I could think is, how the hell am I going to get her out of there? I figured I could at least scare her father long enough for us to get out of there. Then I started to think about her so-called family. She said there was about 30 of them. If things get heated, how am I going to be able to do anything? I loaded my revolver and strapped on my grandfather's underarm holster. I haven't fired this gun in years, but at least I had it. I threw on my jacket and looked at myself in the mirror to see if I could see the gun. After I felt confident enough that it concealed it, I thought to myself, I have to help her. Fucking man up and take control. Robin told me to get there before dark, so I headed up to Valley Road around sunset. It was the only road up the mountain, except for some narrow hiking trails. As the road tightened, I pulled over and popped my bike into neutral. I was suddenly filled with dread. What did I get myself into? I slowly cruised up the dirt road and felt my rear tire slipping. My bike was kicking up rocks and sand all over the place. Harleys are not meant for off-roading, I thought to myself. Then I started to see two houses, side by side, coming up ahead. I parked my bike facing the way I came and started to walk up to the house with the pickup truck. I noticed the barn looming behind the house. I caught a quick glimpse of someone peeking around the barn door and pulling it closed. I stepped onto the porch and reached over to knock. The door quickly swung open and I was greeted by Robin's father, the dermatologist. The same man that gave me those pills, that Zyplo crap. He looked at me up and down and laughed. "Matt, welcome. Come on in. I fixed your hair problem and now I will fill your belly." While walking in, my mind was racing. All this time, her father was the doctor I went to see. I thought to myself, what the hell is this guy's deal? "Hey doc, small world," I said cautiously. He laughed as he placed his hand on my back while guiding me into the dining room.
Call me Luther. We could skip the formalities because the venison is ready and hot. The large buck walked right into my trap.
His voice was deep and pronounced. It almost made you stand at attention. It was very different from the appointment at his dermatology practice.
Robin is setting the table now. Let me take your coat. Please sit,
he said as he gestured for me to hand him my jacket. I paused while thinking, what excuse could I make to keep my jacket on?
You can keep your gun on you if it makes you feel better,
he said. I forced a smile and sat down. I figured he already knows I have it, so I opened my jacket but opted to keep it on.
That's a nice piece. Revolvers are very dependable,
he said. I thought to myself, is he fucking with me? He continued.
You can't be too careful around here. The bears are frisky this time of year.
Yeah, I know. That's why I carry it everywhere. I lied. After giving me a nod, he cleared his throat while he sat across from me at the table and said,
So I wanted you to come here for a nice meal. My daughter has been distracted. I know she likes you, so I became intrigued. Normally I keep her away from town. You seem like you're a good fellow. You accepted my invitation. That shows courage, character.
Robin walked into the room and with a shaky hand placed a platter on the table. The sliced meat drizzled in gravy looked delicious. I noticed Robin seemed nervous and uneasy. She didn't even make eye contact with me as she sat down at the table. Luther, on the other hand, has not taken his eyes off me since I got there. Luther continued as if Robin wasn't even in the room.
Did Robin tell you about our growing family?
She just told me she lived here with her family. Where are they? Are they gonna eat with us? I asked.
No, they're fine. They're just finishing up a day's work in the barn. There's a lot of work to be done around here,
Luther answered. What kind of work? Luther ignored my question and said,
I don't mean to be forward, but about your alopecia.
What about it? I mumbled.
Like I told you, I used to have it myself. It changed my life. It gave me purpose. To make Zyplomine as potent as chemically possible.
Robin looked over at her father with an annoyed look and said,
Dad, please.
Hush, girl. We're talking.
Luther snapped without taking his eyes off me. What, about your shitty pills that made my ears ring and gave me vertigo? I sneered.
My life's work? My purpose? You ungrateful shit!
Luther screamed. This was the point where I felt I needed to get on with this. I reached into my coat and grabbed my revolver, but someone grabbed my arms from behind me and pulled them back down to the chair. Their grip felt as if it would crush my bones, and the gun fell to the floor. They must have been standing quietly in the house the whole time. As I turned my head to look at my captor, another hand grabbed the top of my head and it started to squeeze my temples so tight, I thought my head was gonna pop. I started to kick and push off the table to get free as Robin screamed. Luther quickly grabbed her and forced her back down to her chair. The pressure on my head was excruciating. Luther then began to command,
Calm down and they'll stop squeezing.
As I forced myself to calm down, the hands loosened their grip. I still couldn't move, but the pain subsided.
None of you have touched your meal. Not hungry?
Luther asked and then continued,
You will finally get to see, Robin. I wanted to share this experience with you. I can't trust you. You cannot leave this family. I have worked too hard. I have given up too much.
Dad, please. What are you talking about? What did you do?
Robin cried.
Now both of you will help two more.
Suddenly, I heard the front door open, and footsteps came pounding into the room. 3 men surrounded Robin and held her down to her chair. As I started to fight to get out of my chair, the men holding me down started to squeeze. The pain was tremendous. Luther pulled out a syringe and then injected us with something that chemically imprisoned us where we sat, then pulled out a second syringe filled with a black liquid. As he injected me, he leaned in and said with excitement,
This is a much more effective solution. The pills take too much time. There are too many waiting. The syringe is what binds us. It contains my perfection.
As the men released us, Robin slumped over the table in a drugged stupor. Luther then walked back to his seat, sat down and pulled out a flask. He threw his head back and took a long, deep swig. After he slammed the flask down, he then reached above the china cabinet and pulled down a dusty bottle of whiskey. As he sat down and started to refill his flask, while concentrating not to spill, he said calmingly,
That's it, man. Relax.
The last thing I remember was Luther starting to laugh as if we were drinking buddies, and he said in amazement,
For a skinny guy, you got some tolerance. How are you still awake?
As I awoke, my head was pounding. My eyes took forever to adjust to the old flickering light dangling from above. It filled the room with a sickly yellow glow. I found my right hand handcuffed to a thick metal ring cemented into the wall. Immediately I wanted to scream, but I couldn't open my mouth. I touched my face to find that my mouth had been glued shut. In horror, I felt my lips were as hard as a rock, covered in what I think was crazy glue. I could still smell the glue's pungent aroma. I saw that Robin was handcuffed to the wall across from me. She appeared to still be knocked out. I started to look around for something I could use to free myself. The wine cellar looked as if it was gutted. The ground I was laying on was dirt, which appeared to be soft and fresh. As I tried to sit up, I felt my fingers easily sink into the dirt. Suddenly, the door swung open and I saw Luther standing in the doorway.
Zyplomine has no effect for some people. They are not candidates. Do you want to see what happens if you don't take your medicine?
He explained and then pushed a gagged and handcuffed man to the middle of the room to his knees. I then felt it. The ground beneath me shifted and I froze in fear. Something was in the ground beneath me. The subdued man started to scream out in pain. I could see blood starting to come from his eyes and then his ears, until finally he started coughing up blood as he collapsed to the floor, expelling his last breath. I started to grab clumps of dirt and throw it at Robin to see if I can try and awaken her. She started to move and sit up, holding her head. She looked over at me. I could see tears running down her face. I could feel it was getting closer. I felt myself starting to sink into the dirt. As I started to pull myself out, I felt something grab my leg. My lips tore apart as I screamed. Its grip felt like jagged blades ripping my flesh. I looked down and grabbed the 3-fingered claw grasped around my leg. I couldn't get a tight enough grip because I was cutting myself all over its sharp, rock-like scales. It pulled in close and I saw it had a face. Its head was slowly rising out of the dirt. It had a human-like face, but its eyes were a solid black and red with no pupils and large. Where the mouth should be, there was just a small hole the size of a dime. Then a long, thin black stinger slowly extended out. I looked over to see another one of those things. It had its stinger in Robin's hip while it unshackled her. Then, in just a few seconds, Robin was gone. She was completely pulled underground.
Luther asked, "Do you miss Robin yet?"
With a large grin, he continued,
"She'll be back. Well, sort of. You two will soon be together again, but on my terms."
"Go fuck yourself, you twisted piece of shit!" I screamed as I felt the blood pour out of my torn up lips. Luther's smile quickly left his face as he rushed over and started to bash me with a wooden stick. Suddenly the ground started to shake as more of those things came up out of the ground. There must have been 6 or 7 of them. They quickly started to surround Luther. He then turned to leave the cellar, but those men stood in the doorway and pushed him to the ground. Luther began to scream.
"How dare you defy me? I helped you flourish. How could you betray me?"
The silent men in the doorway proceeded to enter the cellar with blades in their hand. As they surrounded Luther, he just looked over at me with an expressionless face as the man began to stab and slash him to bits. I buried my face in the ground as I felt the blood splash all over me. He barely even screamed. I could hear them ripping him apart. To this day, I could still hear the sounds of his flesh tearing and the droplets splashing in the blood-soaked mud. These men never made a sound. They didn't even seem to breathe. As the cellar became silent, I looked up to see the men and a few of the creatures from the ground, all staring at me. Frozen in complete fear, I expected the same fate as Luther. One of the men approached me, grabbed my wrist, and removed the shackle. Then they all separated, making a path to the doorway. I was followed by one of the men. When I made it to the front door, another man, or rather creature, was standing in front of it and handed me an open book. It pointed to some random notes from Luther.
"Zyplomine allows close proximity without subject suffering severe brain aneurysms. Zyplomine has a side effect of hair growth. By capitalizing this side effect, funding and distribution methods will be endless. These creatures work as a colony. Only a small percentage of subjects are compatible. My bond is with their queen."
It slowly walked me outside to the barn. It was full of men, women, and children, all standing silently. They were all taken over. Some of them looked as if their flesh was starting to rot. When I looked down, I could see the creatures in their original hideous forms halfway out of the ground. I saw Robin just sitting there. It sat me down next to her as one of the creatures began rising from the ground in the center of the barn. This one was different. It was much bigger, and it seemed much older. It was their queen. All of the others formed a circle around us. Robin just sat there. Her demeanor was completely different. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right with her as she started to speak.
"A bond has been made. My family members here are on borrowed time. Their vessels are failing. because they are not compatible. We sense you are compatible. The perfect candidate.
I sat there fearing nowhere to run. I'm fucked. The large one just stared at me 5 feet away. It just sat there waiting. I can't even put into words what it was like to be surrounded by those things. Seeing people standing there while not breathing filled me with dread. Suddenly it lunged at me and had a hold of my leg, and in that instant, its stinger was deep in my leg and our bond was made. I've just been so tired. No matter how much I sleep, I'm always tired. Sometimes I wake up to find myself covered in blood. It's someone else's blood. The last few nights I've been filming myself with the iPhone. The videos show that after I fall asleep, I get out of bed and leave the room. Hours later, I return covered in blood and climb back into bed. This bond has made me their puppet. Since then, Robin's never spoken to me again. She just sat there watching me. She lasted about 8 years before rotting. For those 8 long years, I had to watch her slowly rot until she was a used-up, empty vessel. She lasted so much longer than the other drones. I think it was just to torture me. My humanity rotted along with Robin. As for her father, Luther, I can only conclude his greed is what made them turn on him. The fact that he lost focus on spreading Zyplomine efficiently. His whole idea on capitalizing on Zyplomine's side effect of hair regrowth was only a good idea if your goal was money. It was an idea that did not serve our queen. This morning I found my old employee ID card. I figure returning to my old job at a water purification plant will have its advantages, way more practical than opening a dermatology practice. Getting your daily dose of Zyplomine will be as easy as drinking a glass of water.